Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Gym Break podcast where we talk to leaders within the gym space. We talk everything from visionary type information all the way down to trends that we see in the gym and studio space. And so today I'd like to welcome Drew. Drew, thank you for coming on today. You're one of the first few of the rebrand of our podcast here, and I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and give everyone a little bit of insight on your story.
Yeah, Zach, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I love the concept of what you're doing here and excited to be a part of the rebrand. So I've been in the fitness industry for close to 10 years now. I started my business in Arizona. I'm based in Gilbert now. Went to ASU. They had an exercise and wellness program, which was really insightful. Like, learned a lot about actually working with people. They have a lab there where you kind of they give you test clients. So it was great. And I've done a little bit of everything in the business, from in-home personal training. I'm sure we've all done some of that when we start out, right? And then adaptive fitness, corporate wellness, and really have had a broad experience of those things and learned what I liked and what I didn't like. And that has really allowed me to help, fitness professionals that are business owners get their business connected through various marketing avenues online. And yeah, so today I do two things. Is I work with companies to frame up and better improve their wellness programs, support their employees, use all the resources they have for them. And then my second hat is helping fitness professionals really get connected with businesses in their area to generate referrals and really just be, like my mentor Pat Rigsby says, 3 mile famous.
3 mile famous. Tell me a little bit more about that. What's behind that?
Yeah, I think it relates a lot to what you guys do too, but it's really just being known as the mayor of fitness in your community, where you can be, when people think of exercise, they think of you. So being a part of your school PTA, sponsoring the local flag football league, just really trying to be known in your area. And one of my friends who's a fitness professional, his name's Joe Martin, and he's in Huntsville. He's got a shirt that says Huntsville famous. And I think that's the kind of the epitome of it, right? Is just trying to be known in your area. And I think it works for people to grow their fitness business.
Well, I think that's a good subject to the beginning of this conversation because, me being in the marketing side and, before we kind of launched Gym Mark, we kind of worked with a plethora of businesses. I think in the marketing field per se, I started off 8 years ago, I really pushed organically. I was like, hey, I want to work with all these companies. The United States is my market. But I started bringing a lot of brick and mortar type facilities in and focusing much more on the local market. And I've come to see this trend where people, their vision is so strong. Their vision is so strong. They're we want to be known all over the world. And it's hold up. There's enough money in your local area that you can grow a multi-million dollar, if not expand to even high, I'm not going to say high 8 figures, but mid 7-figure type ranges just by focusing on building your community around your local area.
Yeah, I agree. I think when we're early in business, we, like you said, you think it's how do I get known? How do I get famous worldwide? And that's really not it, right? Because especially in metro markets like Phoenix, where we're at, man, there are so many people and so many even just foot traffics. I know that's what you all help with a lot with Google. But there's just so many opportunities to introduce your business to people in your area, and we'll worry about our Facebook ad before we'll introduce our business to our kids' parent, our kids' friends' parents, right? So I think there's a lot more grassroots we can do, at least initially.
Well, and it's interesting because there is a statistic that every time I get on a call with gyms in specific, because I think there's a difference between when you're working with a transactional type brick and mortar that's a one-off purchase, right? You're going in and you're buying a smoothie, or you're buying, a product that you might not have to repurchase for another 5 years, compared to a retention-based gym membership model where it's hey, you have to keep coming back. And I don't just see it in the gym space, but I've seen it in any sort of reoccurring membership, like chiropractors, physical therapists, and things of that nature, where it's I'm always I ask them, they come on these calls, I get on these prospect calls, and they want to do all this fluffy stuff. They want to do all these different marketing tactics based off of what they see or what they've already tried. And it's overcomplication. I think that's a visionary in all of us, but all this stuff. I'm well, what's your close rate? And they're always probably about a 10, 15%, and they do all these fancy challenges with nothing wrong with challenges, right? But 10, 15%. And then I'm like, well, what's the close rate when you have a walk-in? They're like, oh, well, they're around 50%. And I'm like, so why aren't you focusing on what's working compared to what's not working?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. 100%. And I think too, with fitness, like everyone knows they need to exercise. They're just not ready to do it right now. So as long as you can stay top of mind and relevant and like showing that, like true full transparency, we do a lot of outbound email. And I think it works because we don't do it in a way where it's like, hey, you need to sign up with us today and it's a hard close. It's like, hey, here's who I am. Here's what I do. Here's where we're located. Would love to meet you for a cup of coffee. Would love to kind of, soft introduce what we do. That works well with referral partners too. And again, you could just go next door and meet the business next to you and introduce yourself to a handful of new customers that day instead of worrying about, like you said, ad spend or a website SEO or all the fancy things that we could do as business owners to market.
Let's take a step back because I want to hear a little bit more about what you do, because outbound emails, I feel they have a bad rap because of the way people abuse the system, and I call spray the wall effect, kind of system. So can you tell me a little bit more about your outbound strategy, or maybe it's more of an inbound strategy, who knows, depending on what your strategy looks like, that can kind of give people kind of a much more peace of mind when it's coming to, hey, how do we build much more of a membership base?
Yeah, absolutely. So bad rap outbound is, I think of it like, hey, I'm going to have a blanketed email series that's going to go to a pool of people, and my response rate is going to be really low, right? Because we're not really personalizing anything. We're just kind of putting spaghetti on the wall and hoping it sticks. I think about it a little bit differently in a sense where we work to help introduce our services. Like for a fitness studio, it would be the local chiropractor, the physical therapist, the school. Like if you do speed training and sports performance, you can get connected with their strength coach, and maybe they don't do speed training. And it's more of an outbound series in the sense of like you find their contact information, introduce yourself in a professional way. So what we do is help them source the contact information and put together the script of what to say. And then it's like a phone call follow-up. And then it's like, hey, I'm going to mail you a professional folder about our services. And maybe it's a discount to summer camp or whatever you're offering. But yeah, so that's how I was able to build my business in a corporate setting with like referral partners. It was like me finding contact information for the right people, introducing my business, following up via phone, and just kind of staying on that track. So, but it was very much so like, how can I complement what you all do from a physical therapy standpoint? How can I help your chiropractor folks stay in great posture in between adjustments? So you try to like serve the people first. So yeah, that's more like outbound relationship building.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's the B2B side, right? It's kind of coming in and saying, hey, let's try to find partners. So it's less so outbound, like salesy, like, so you're not necessarily reaching the members. This sounds a lot like a pre-sale type strategy, correct? Like when maybe a gym's just open, or maybe they're still in validation phase where they're like, hey, we just need to get our gym off the ground to a certain spot so we can eventually expand. How do you go about helping them hit the types of partnerships that they reach out to?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's different in different markets. Like we have a client in Portland, Maine, and he's had his facility for like 12 years, right? So he's pretty established. And for him, it's connecting with people that could help him in the corporate wellness setting and or just help promote, their gym and build brand awareness. So in that sense, it's like looking at past clients and where they work, or current clients and where they work, and kind of getting introduced to the right person within that business. And then for new places, I think it's more looking at, again, like the go-giver approach, where how can I help you on the front end? So if it's a locally owned physical therapist studio versus like a Spooner physical therapy, you're probably going to have more luck on, joint marketing ventures with that professional. So I would look for businesses that you could complement well. Maybe you do nutrition and a gym doesn't, so you could help with that. And then just staying consistent with getting in touch with them. Because I think the way I think about it is like try to contact 10 qualified referral partners a week, and you qualify them by, they're also locally owned. There's a gap in their services that you could fill, and vice versa. And then, out of those 10, you might get 1 or 2 appointments a week. And hopefully within the first, couple months of doing that, you all are able to build some mutual beneficial relationships. Like they send out, your front end offer to your gym, to their email list. Your members get a free adjustment at the chiropractor clinic, that type of thing.
It's funny you say this. I want to bring up a couple things here because, I actually had on our last podcast, I was talking to an individual named Kyle Anderson, and he owns a pre-sale type gym consulting type situation. We were kind of having the same kind of talk on complementary. And I actually brought up something that one of the places that I say quite a bit, which is at preschools. Go to your local preschool, because you're going to have, I think that, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think you and I can both agree that there's a time and a place to be like to possibly grow into a full service type gym, right? I think that, me being in the marketing industry, it's very easy for me to say, hey, I'm going to bring on a service or I'm going to do this, but the same problem still arises, which is operations, right? Like, how much are you going to put forth to all these different types of services and trainers, and then stuff gets diluted. And so I think at the very beginning with your strategy and saying, hey, there's enough money to go around. There's nothing wrong with you finding non-vertical type competitors that could actually benefit and do something along the lines of even possibly a joint membership type of scenario, or a joint arrangement where, your clientele and your membership does also need physical therapy. Or let's say you're working with moms and you're doing a yoga studio, right? You're like, oh, we have a daycare center, but you're not going to be able to compete with the EOSs and the big box gyms that have these big centers, right? And so you're going to have to find ways now to bring as much quality to your initial stage services and allow for you to breathe a little bit and have a better bottom line. And I think that brings up a good point, which is when you're working with these gyms and you're starting to help them make it to the next level of their ownership, is there any sort of pain points that you see from them as gym owners that you're like, hey, we possibly have to get past these hurdles, from either a mindset situation or just a business understanding situation, from organization and operations to marketing or anything along those natures?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I got a couple things to share there. I think one, we often give up sales too early as business owners. Like I remember when I was, doing all kinds of corporate fitness services, I would think to myself, why aren't my trainers bringing me in accounts? Why aren't they bringing in clients? And then I talked to my mentor about it, and he's like, well, if they were, they probably wouldn't need you. And I was like, oh, that's a really good point. So I think owners should, in my experience, stay like on top of sales until they're at a point where they're at a level that it doesn't really matter if they grow a certain percentage every month, and they can kind of, they have a system that brings them in X amount of new clients, and they're losing, a small fraction of that. So I think that's a big one, trying to hand off sales too early. And then the second one is not like you said, the mindset part is being in the open mind to create those mutual beneficial relationships. Like what you shared about the childcare center, that's wonderful. I never even thought about that, right? Like if I was a daycare guy and you were the gym guy, and we're like, yeah, you could drop your kids off here and we'll charge you X and I build you or something for it, right? Like how cool would that be as a value add to your members? And who knows, one day we could open up a big facility together, right? So I think it's being open to those community partnerships, and also being open to like opening up your schedule and going to have lunch and not really caring what the outcome's going to be, but being willing to build that relationship. So those are the two that I think could help owners just kind of go from that, like, hey, we're hitting the same ceiling, expenses are the same, even when we're bringing in new people, we're not doing much more, to like, hey, we can actually, breathe a little bit where they don't have to focus on sales so much. They can have more flexibility.
Now, you kind of brought up the don't get rid of sales too early. Can you go a little bit deeper in that? Because from my experience, what I see is that people from a gym owner perspective, depending on, of course, where they are and within the growth of their gym, they tend to actually keep the sales, and I'm not going to call it sales on too long. What I'm going to call it is they get stuck in validation mode too long. And so can you explain a little bit about that and see and give everyone a little bit more deeper insight into what that kind of looks like?
Yeah. So I would say, like, if your business is in a place where you're getting inquiries without you doing work, right? Like if people are looking you up online and finding you, and you're able to pay someone, like if you have a full-time manager, then that person should absolutely be doing your assessments and, onboarding new clients. But if you're in a place where, like, because I find, man, even gym owners that are doing 30 grand a month, they're not making 10. So, like, I don't think as an owner, we don't really earn the right to hand off sales until we're making like 6 figures a year. I think, because if our goal is to have a business that is profitable, that could like pay us for retirement, sellable one day, it needs to be enough to pay a manager as well as a healthy profit for an owner. So I think if you have a system where, yes, you're bringing in 10 new leads a week, out of those 10 new leads, you're booking 5 appointments, and you personally can close 3 of those 5 and then maybe hand it off and you're closing 2.5 of those 5, then sure, hand off sales. But again, like if you're not making 6 figures, if you're not able to pay a full-time person, and like, yeah, so I think there's like this phase, and it also depends on our personal wants and needs, right? Like I'm a sole income earner, like my wife doesn't work. So like my income need is much higher than someone who maybe their wife's a traveling nurse and they do really well. So I think that matters too. So you got to decide, like, do you want flexibility and freedom initially once you make a healthy income? Because for some people it could be 60, 70 grand a year. Or like get your finances set in a place where you are saving for retirement, you're paying off your whatever loans and debt you have, and you can hire someone to replace yourself in the business. I think that's like a good place to say, okay, I don't need to ring the cash register personally every day.
And I take it you're talking about bottom line, not top line, correct?
Yeah, like in my experience, a healthy profit for a gym is like 30 to 40%.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm an owner and I'm doing 30 grand a month, right, then I might be profiting 10 on a healthy month. And in my opinion, to include health benefits, all the stuff I have to pay to operate my business, I'm still barely taking home 8. And that's without paying a manager. So I really think, like, if your goal is to make 200,000 a year, there's got to be a lot of buffer room there. And I think us as owners, typically we're going to like generate sales more. And not to say that someone else shouldn't also be doing sales. Like you can have 2 people involved for sure. But if you want to just look up on Friday and see how many assessments were booked and how many were sold without being involved in it, I think you need to be at a pretty good, profit and income level to do that.
Yeah. I think 30% is still pretty high personally myself. And I'll use this for an example. And this wasn't in the gym niche, but I had a landscaper come over a few months ago to do some stuff in our backyard, and he was still pretty small. He was only making about $100K a year, within what he was doing. He didn't have a brick and mortar, of course. So he didn't have those expenses that most gyms do from a location standpoint. But he was talking to me a little bit about, I need to do marketing. I need to hire someone to do this. I'm having someone tell me I need to do social media over here, but then I need a website over here. And I'm like, dude, what you're doing right now is great. You don't need fancy marketing tactics yet. Like, to start building that kind of system, you're going to need to have a good, healthy profit margin in place so that you can actually start dedicating 10% of your reoccurring to start building that sustainability, right? And the reason I bring that up is because what you're talking about is absolutely correct. Like, to get to the next level of gym ownership, especially with mindset, I was talking to finance expert with one of our previous podcasts. Well, she does gym ownership and finance. And I was asking her a little bit, like, what do you see within that percentage of marketing? And she agreed with me. She's like, I think 10% is a good, healthy line that gyms should start really dedicating to their marketing and their branding and what they're trying to do. But she's like, but 90% of my clients don't do any marketing at all. They look at it and they just kind of like, they try to, I'm not going to say bootstrap it, but possibly bootstrap it a little bit too long, And as a leader in the gym space, I really liked how you brought up, hey, yeah, as a leader, as the owner, you need to become more of that leader, right? You're probably going to be doing the sales. You're probably going to be doing that stuff. So be okay with understanding that you're not going to be able to walk away from the inner workings of the gym until you reach a high enough number.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like even some peers that I have that I'm in a coaching group with that are at a pretty high number, they'll joke and say like, oh, you know, I don't really need to be involved at my staff meetings, right? But they worked really hard to get there. There was like years of like, this sucks. I shouldn't hire this person, like paying them too much, not paying them enough. So yeah, and it is a bumpy middle phase, but like at least you're getting paid well. Like, so to give you all context, Zach and I are in Gilbert, and recently I looked up, you know, what are the top 1% earners make in Gilbert, like income earners, and it's $132,000 a year. Well, like that's not far off from what like my business paid me after expenses last year. And I still feel like I got a bit to go, right? So I think when we think of our income in our business, it really depends on like where you're located and yeah, make it work for your household too. But yeah, I think often we, as business owners, we think like, yeah, but it's going to give me flexibility and freedom and income, and not realize like there's a lot of work to do to get there.
Yeah, there is. It's not just saying, hey, you know, I'm going to hire one person in this little gym. But at the same time, I think it goes back to, I mean, I don't want to get too much off subject here, but I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper on what the internet has done from a good perspective, but what it's done in a bad perspective. I'll let you kind of mention the good stuff because we've kind of already gone there. But I mean, from a bad perspective, I mean, I think people get marketing fatigue. They end up, and how do I explain this correctly? The things that were working aren't going to continue to work as you continue to grow, right? You're probably, I mean, when I have prospects come to me and they're making under $500K a year as a gym owner, I usually say what you said. I'm like, hey, you pretty much are still probably in validation phase. And you're going to be bootstrapping. You're going to be doing your sales. You're going to be focusing on, this is the time when you need to start bringing in A players, not focus on those D players, unfortunately. But you're also going to have to realize that, hey, you're probably going to take a dip. There's times when you're going to have to take a dip in what you make to evolve the brand and the gym that you're trying to make to the next level. And I think that that's the shift that a lot of these gym owners have a hard time making.
Yeah, man, I'm so glad you shared that. It brings a lot to mind for me. In my world, I've retweaked like what my roles looked like in my business a lot. Services we offer, everything. And I think gym owners can do that too, right? They could have a health club. They could do online coaching. Like they have lots of options. I think when we take that dip too, we need to understand what the trade-off is. Because the dip could be maybe 1 year you took home 180 and the next year you're only going to take home 160 because you're hiring an admin, right? But then because you hire an admin, you can free up, 4 hours a week for consultations on your calendar, and now you're bringing home 200 the following year, right? Like that could be the dip. But the dip could also be maybe because you hire an admin, you're able to sustain the same level of income, and now you can like coach your kids' basketball team in the afternoon and not work till 8 and then have to be at the gym at 6 a.m. the next day. So I think too, we can like in that hard grind, we can have some good lifestyle wins, life flexibility stuff, like life satisfaction stuff, and still feel like we're winning as business owners, even though we're not constantly making, more and more money.
Yeah, it's funny because you see a lot of gym owners become gym owners because they, like you said, they used to be personal trainers. They want to kind of take it to the next level. And that spectrum, which we don't really work with personally because they're still pretty small and I don't really feel like they need marketing as of yet. But they usually have to shift their mindset from that, hey, time should no longer equal money for you. Money needs to start equal time, right? And I think that that's kind of a shift that people have to take. But then there comes another time that people don't really talk about, which, okay, I'm shifting money equals time, but I'm still in this delegation phase. Still, I'm a glorified, being a leader in the gym space, you're going to come to a point where you're realizing at around, usually it's around the 500K at that dip, you're like, I need to start bringing on people that don't have a direct correlation to income, right? Like admin, possibly marketing or branding. I mean, marketing does have an attribute to bringing in business, but you need to stop doing that stuff yourself, and you need to focus much more on becoming a leader and not a delegator. And that's why I get so frustrated with a lot of business developers, because they're just like, hey, just delegate everything. Just delegate. And I'm like, it doesn't really work that way. If you were just to delegate everything, you'd have no systems in place. You'd have no operations. Everything would be all over the place. And a lot of those positions you need to learn yourself before you can hire those people on. And so I think there's a shift in mindset and doing those much more higher actionable items that you don't even probably know exist yet.
Yeah, totally. I think of this in a sense of like, because like when we hire someone, literally we're just asking them to do stuff that's within our business, right? We brought in the client. We said, we're going to pay you this. We make all the rules. And then I have find as business owners, our expectations of the outcome is really high. We want them to do it in the same way we do it. We're pissed off because it's not as good and they maybe don't have the best taste in their mouth after we give them feedback initially. So what I've learned is I've learned to think of, because with my team, you know, there's 4 of us total, and I think of how I am coaching them just as if I was training a new client that came into personal training at a health club. It's like, this person doesn't know how to squat yet. I know what a squat looks like. I need to show them what our version of a squat is, and then they're going to do their best, and I'll coach them up to get there. So we're really qualified to help people like improve in life. And I think we just need to think about when we bring them into our business, like you said, we're the leader, we're the coach, we're the mentor, and it does take a lot of patience. And typically as high achieving entrepreneurs, we don't have that patience, but we need it, right? Because we're not going to find someone that's achieving and overarching and as educated and skilled as us to come do the job for a wage that we can make money on. It's going to be someone like, obviously we can pay them well, but it's like, you know, it needs to be market rate too. So we also need to be willing to provide that training and that support that they would get if they were to go work at, you know, a bigger company.
And I think market rate is a huge thing I want to touch on a little bit here, because you talked a little bit earlier about the gyms and taking that we take that sacrifice and kind of understanding the things that, you know, taking that dip in expenses, not in expenses, taking that dip in what you get paid yourself. I kind of want to bring up a little bit about that pricing, and I want to talk a little bit about positioning, because I do think that there's a common trend in the industry that, especially now, and I mean, I want to hear this from your side, especially with the trends and the growing of the gym industry as a whole altogether, is that positioning side of things. Like, when do you feel that you've seen gyms take that? And the reason I bring this up is because earlier you brought up shifting mindset. To me, I look at mindset shift as kind of in those valley of death periods, is it usually a time to evolve and rebrand. I look at like even a personal self, like, oh, I'm rebranding myself, right? Like I'm making it to the next level, and how I want to grow the business and how I want to grow the brand. And when do you kind of see that spectrum within either your audience or some of your partners, where it's like, hey, we need to define services, we need to position ourselves even deeper than the demographics of an area to, all right, these are the types of people I want to bring into my gym?
Yeah, man. I think in my experience, I think it's when they're able to look at their business outside of themselves. They don't take it personal when someone asks them what their rate is, right? Like, I think when we're early in business, like, we feel very connected to providing a personal training, a fitness, a group class, a yoga, whatever service. And then someone's like, oh, that's too much. Like, we take it personal to our core. You cannot do that to grow $1 million fitness business, right? Like, you have to be able to think of it as, how can I package a product and a service that I can market to these specific people in a way that makes me feel good? And I think, like, typically when they're able to do that and bring someone else on in their business, pricing and positioning needs to look in a way like they can position themselves better in the market by, you know, not being cookie cutter like the, you know, regular whatever box studio is in their neighborhood, but also providing more value to their clients, like having a comprehensive onboarding process that gives them some tools for nutrition, that gives them some resources for recovery that they wouldn't get at the regular health club. And then in a sense of growing the business, being able to package up those services in a way that they could grow it at scale. Like I talked to a lot of early business owners and they do group programming, and I'll ask them, hey, how much? Because they'll say, oh yeah, I pay a coach $30 a session to run it. And I'm like, cool. How much does each session bring in? And they won't know that. They'll know that what they charge for a membership, and they'll know how many members they have, but they won't know how much each session brings in. So the owners that do really well are typically able to create programming and pricing where, maybe they're billing out $250 for a semi-private training program, and they're able to pay the trainer like $10 more than they would get at the health club up the street. Helps them retain the person more. It helps them provide a higher level of service, and it also helps them like be able to scale their business in a sense of they're not trading every hour they have for providing services and taking it really personal, and people aren't willing to pay, $150 an hour for training.
And I think group sessions are a huge thing, and they're spoken a lot within the marketing and just the marketing world. I mean, I see a lot of other like competitors of mine, or one of their main criteria, which is kind of a criteria is ours as well, is you need to have some sort of group training type environment within your gym in your ecosystem. And to go a little deeper here, I think the reasoning group sessions are so powerful is because you do have a brick and mortar. Like there's only so many people that you can fit in a gym at one given time. And so basically what you're doing is you're allocating space for more of your members at a certain time of day, so that you're kind of scheduling when your members will come. And so you can elevate the space that you're paying for from an expense standpoint, offer more memberships.
Absolutely.
And what you were saying about group classes, and, to be honest, I personally, since I do the marketing and branding side, I really don't know much about how someone can really allocate those expenses, So I love to hear a little bit how you've seen it, and how someone could possibly, if any sort of gym owner is on and listening to this, any sort of way that they can start allocating those expenses properly.
Yeah, like costs for like labor for group training, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would think of it like, one thing that I've learned too is people that do well with their staff is like they think of it as shifts, right? So say you're doing a bunch of personal training at your facility, but you have opportunity to open up semi-private, and say you can fit 6 people in a semi-private session, right? Typically pricing on that is like, I would say between 30 and 60 a session. Like if you're in Scottsdale, 60 a session for semi-private would be fine, because private is probably like 150 a session.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're in like Tucson, 30 for semi-private to 40 might be more appropriate. But what you're trying to do as the owner is like figure out, okay, if we can fit 6 people in this session, and let's just use high numbers. We're charging, $360. We're charging $60. We get 6 people, so we're getting $360 for this time slot, the semi-private time slot. Obviously, as we know, in the fitness industry, you got to think about transition time. You got to think about setup time. You got to think about building client report time. So if you run like a 6 a.m. class, 7 a.m. class, and an 8 a.m. class, you could do, 6 people in each, and their membership, let's say they go twice a week. Their membership is $120 a week, which is $480 a month per person, right? But then you're still, at capacity, you're able to bill out $360 per session. So in my experience, like we don't want labor more than like 35%. So you could do it a couple different ways. Is you could say, hey, fitness professional, we'd love to hire you. And when we think about hiring, it's like a sales page. We want to invite them in. Like it's just like we're selling for a business, but we would hire them for a shift. And that shift would be, the morning shift. Let's say it's 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. sessions, which take 4 hours. And maybe we pay them for 5 hours, half hour on the front end, half hour on the back end. But you'd want to pay them, I think, like a fair hourly wage. And let's say it's 30% of that 360. That's $108. So that's still like too much money to hire a trainer for. But you could still, market $45 an hour and pay them for that 5-hour shift. You're doing really well from a profitability standpoint. But what I think people are hesitant on is they're like, those sessions aren't full yet. What am I going to do? I'm going to pay this person. They're not full yet. The best coaches like go into it confidently, and their job is to fill those sessions, and they don't open up another one until the first one's full, right? So if you have no semi-private membership yet, open up a time slot, work like crazy to fill it, and then grow from there. But the per hour profitability rate is like huge compared to any other services I've seen.
And do you recommend that when they're kind of coming up with these group type classes that because this is what I see a lot of gyms kind of, especially the boutique studios doing. And just as anyone references, usually boutique studios just to me is you're not franchised. Yeah. Because I think that the funny thing is that, and there's nothing wrong with franchises and franchise gyms. I see their benefit in the market as well. But what I see is that the thing with franchise gyms is they don't really have necessarily a target audience. They're just like, hey, we have the money and the equity to be full service and to do all these different types of classes for those types of individuals that want a little bit of everything. And I think the problem with the boutique gyms and studios is they try to mimic the big box. The only time I feel like that's even something you should do is if you're looking to eventually franchise. But if you're not, I feel like you're kind of only setting yourself up for failure. So when it comes to the strategy of coming up with the types of classes, what would you recommend for like a boutique style?
Yeah. So what we see do really well is like the post-rehab, prehab stuff. So it's a lot of like joint integrity work. Doesn't mean you don't have like, a squat rack and all that good stuff, but you're doing things that are like muscle activation, total body strength training. You're not marketing fat loss. You're marketing like playing with your grandkids and doing the hike up Camelback Mountain. So I think the positioning for those classes is much more lifestyle focused. It's not calorie burn focused. And when you're selling that, connecting with those local businesses that do knee replacements, that do physical therapies, it's kind of a no-brainer because you can build the rapport in a sense of like, they trust you that you're actually going to take care of their people. Whereas like, if I'm a chiropractor, I have no idea what coach is coaching 7 p.m. at the franchise place. So I'm not really going to send my people there. So I think that's how they do it well in a sense of positioning is like, we're not going to break you. We're actually going to build you up. Yeah, that's what I've seen work really well.
Yeah, and you actually brought something up that becomes a really not a pet peeve of mine, but what I see people not understanding is you just basically initiated a brand strategy, right? With what you just said there, because I thought it was pretty funny because really at the end of the day, you just talked about introducing types of classes and outcomes based off of a certain type of demo that would like that. And then you partnered with relatable situations back to what I was talking about earlier with, the daycare center. If you're focusing on 25 to 35-year-old women, even up to 45, maybe you have types of classes that resonate with those types of people. And so you basically just came up with a brand strategy right there, just like, hey. And I just thought that was hilarious because I think that it will push people into that mindset, kind of give them an understanding of what you just did was, in short, a practice that leaders should be taking. And those things are actually going to move the needle much faster than, hey, we just need to hire someone down the street to come up with a banner for us, per se. And so I thought that was really cool that you just did that. And that makes sense. And I've actually seen a lot of statistics lately that says a lot of the boutique gyms are starting to, in today's environment, are starting to try to bring in more of that physical therapy type classes within their environment.
Yeah, it makes sense. I actually have a client in Alaska. The lady's awesome. Her name's Bonnie Murphy. She did like a Fit Body boot camp at her studio. She did some other franchise, and now it's just Be Fit and Well in Anchorage. And I think Bonnie, I don't know exactly, but she's 60 plus, and like she recently had 2 knee replacements, and she owns the heck out of that market. Like people know her. All the mom and pop places are sending her clients. So yeah, it's like, go where your people are. You know what I mean? Like whoever you work with, and usually like who we're best helping is the people we're a couple steps ahead of, right? So like Bonnie, she's like, yep, I went through this knee stuff. I can help people that are going to go through this too. So if you're a passionate gym owner, got injured, go network with physical therapists and create a semi-private training program.
Yeah, and you brought something up there that I think is quite interesting too. We did a podcast that we just put live about a couple weeks ago on expansion strategies for gyms, and the funny thing with that is we talked a lot about location, and I like to bring up this story quite a bit because in my industry per se, with what we do, and you talked about earlier what we do, like we do focus on warm marketing, sustainable leads through, Google search and positioning and all that fun stuff. I had a prospect come in, and this isn't in the gym environment, but it's the stand, and you kind of brought it up earlier too. The system still needs to be set properly, or you're gonna fail from day one. And you said go where your people are. And I had this prospect come in, and she was opening a miniature golf course, and you're out here, so you understand. She had a chance to open up by the before main event opened up by the Top Golf down the street where we live, and it was back then, and then she had that option, or she had an option to go out to the middle of Santan, which, if no one knows on this podcast, is basically all desert. There's nothing there, and it was cheaper, of course, but she went with the open space because she's like, I don't want to compete with Top Golf. And I was like, your business just failed before you even started. And so I want people, and the reason I bring up that story is because you brought that up. You brought up go where your people are, and you even brought up a situation earlier where you're like, hey, even if you open a location next to one of these complementary, businesses like the daycare or a health restaurant or something like that, where it's like, open up next to the Top Golf. It's a non-vertical competitor. They're not they're the same audience, but they're not, like,
Buddy.
Yeah. Like, you're going to get all the kids that don't want to go and play Top Golf, or the families that are tired and they would rather go to a miniature golf course, right? And so think about that. And I think that's a big, if you're either expanding or you're opening your first location, I understand price is a huge issue, especially right now with the economy and commercial real estate. But I would say, pay that extra, $200, $300 a month for a location and it's probably going to be more than that. I wouldn't know because every location is different. So basically just don't look at the demo, right? Make sure that you're strategically setting yourself near these complementary services and kind of leverage that to your benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, because I know obviously in the early stages, like looking at that lease could be scary, but yeah, to your point, like even if it's a small jump, being in the right area is important. I think about where we are and where we hung out when we had coffee. So we're in Gilbert here, and when I moved here in 2015, it was very modest, right? But they opened this place called the Epicenter, and I bet the collab or whatever the fitness center is called there, they're probably paying definitely 5 figures a month for rent, right? But man, I bet they were full at capacity within the first month because of the
The Epicenter. Remind me of that one. I don't know if I've heard of that one.
So the Epicenter is just a big sign that's over the like the co-living and business center at Higley and Ray. So right behind what's that place called? Air Guitar is the Epicenter.
So they're in the apartment complex area.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I think I've walked by there before they were opening. They're open, right?
Yeah, I saw a bunch of ladies walking around with kettlebells the other day. So they're open and rocking. Same. We got an F45 up the street, and again, I bet their rent is a ton, but like they're full right away because everyone knows they're there.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you have to look at those types of situations when you're picking a location. Probably very high 5 figures, I would say, and it's probably a smaller space too. But they're probably niched, so they know their audience. They probably did their foundations pretty fast and said, we're not going to be a full service gym. We're just going to focus on this. So they were able to go cheaper on equipment. They were able to go leaner in operations, and their marketing, not going to say it worked for itself, but those foundations are set. I mean, it's so easy. I'm not gonna bash online businesses at all, because I do hear a lot of personal trainers that do get to a point within owning a gym where they're like, I just want to do everything online. But I will say the grass isn't greener. We have us online businesses like you and myself that you go and we meet people. We have a lot of different marketing challenges that you guys do. So be grateful. Let your space be your epicenter for bringing in that business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Drew, we could probably go all day. You and I have talked about this quite a bit, so I apologize if I chatted a little more than you on this one. So we'll definitely have another one going on here. I definitely want to hear a lot more on some of your strategies. So maybe we plan this to be a 2-part series, and I have you on again here in a few weeks, and we go a little bit deeper into a strategy that could possibly help one of these gyms. How does that sound?
Yeah, I'd love to, man. Sounds good.
All right, cool. Well, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you, and let everybody know a little bit about you before you head out.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm most active on LinkedIn. You can find me Drew Saenz, Saenz. And if you're not on LinkedIn, I recommend you connect to me with there and just checking it out. Like, you'll get an invite to my newsletter. You'll kind of see the different features that could be different on that platform that may be helpful for you. And our website's Team Up at Work, and that talks a little bit about our corporate work we do as well too. So yeah, you can find me those 2 places.
Beautiful. Well, if anyone needs to find those links, I'm also going to put them down in the comment box as well, so that you can reach out to Drew and get connected with them. But again, Drew, thanks for coming on another episode of the Gym Break podcast, and I look forward to talking to you a little bit more on the part 2 of this.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I look forward to it.
All right.